Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Sindhu Blume.
And I'm Scott McCandless. It's the week of October 7th, and this is your Monday briefing. Congress is out and returns November 12th, and we are 29 days away from this year's presidential election.
Today, we're going to focus on the election and tax reform with Andrew Pryor, and later, the IRS clean energy provisions with Randa Barsoum. Andrew, welcome.
It's great to be back.
So the September jobs report came out last week. What impact, if any, that's going to have on the election as we are heading into the home stretch?
Sure. So, I mean, just to set it up, the September jobs report was a bit of a surprise. I think economists were expecting maybe 150,000 job gain. It ended up being 254,000. Plus, they revised the prior 2 months. Another 72,000 added to those two prior months. So it was a strong jobs report, and I think that probably helps the Harris presidential campaign in the sense that there's no October surprise with a disappointing jobs report. Voter polling would suggest that the economy remains the number one issue that voters are taking into the polls. And when it comes to the polling about who do they trust more on the economy, former President Trump continues to have an advantage over Kamala Harris. But I would say that on inflation, we're seeing that she is starting to kind of eat into his lead on his handling of bringing costs down. She certainly is well below where the advantage that Trump had over Biden. So this has to be, some helpful news. I mean, I think at this point, as people are going to the polls, the idea is let's try to avoid any October surprises. Now, we do have a CPI report that's going to be coming out later this month. We've got this hurricane, the second hurricane that's going to be hitting later this week. So there are still some economic consequences that could flow from that. But right now, I think they have to take heart in this positive jobs report.
Andrew, turning to Congress, they departed. As we noted at the top, they're on recess. But before they departed, they passed a short-term spending bill that gets us to December 20th. So in December, is it possible, and if so, to what extent, might that spending bill in December carry some tax provisions?
Yeah, I think there's at least some small ball tax provisions that could get included. I mentioned the hurricane, and obviously there's a lot of interest in disaster relief, both in terms of funding, but in terms of tax provisions. And both the broader tax bill that the House passed back in January, plus on a standalone basis, there is a disaster tax relief package that's hanging out there. So I think that has a good shot. Now, I guess one question is, does Congress come back, before the election to address disaster relief? Well, I think the indications are that FEMA has enough funding. The continuing resolution provided some additional money that they can get through the end of the year, although this new hurricane, coming through could scramble that a little bit. So it doesn't look like there's an appetite to come back before the election. So I think you add disaster relief to the list of priorities of must-pass legislation, government funding, the National Defense Reauthorization Bill, and the Farm Reauthorization Bill. Of those four items, I think disaster relief and appropriations are the two most likely vehicles for tax provisions. And query whether or not disaster relief doesn't get rolled into the government funding. I think it's a question of timing. How quickly do they need to provide disaster relief funding versus resolving the government funding debate? So are there two vehicles? Are there one vehicle? But I think at a minimum, I think you would expect to see disaster tax relief part of that debate. There's also a Taiwan treaty-like tax benefit provisions that were in that House-passed bill that I mentioned, the broader bill. There's a lot of bipartisan interest in that because it is a way to try to facilitate cross-border investment that would promote U.S. semiconductor manufacturing consistent with the CHIPS Act. So I think there's a lot of interest in that. And then, of course, you get to the more difficult question of what happens to those TCJA business tax provisions. We've talked before about restoring 174 R&D expensing, restoring the EBITDA business interest limitation under 163J, and 100% bonus depreciation. And I think, as other guests and yourself have mentioned, it's going to depend on the election outcome and whether both political parties see it in their interest. And we'll just have to wait and see. But I think the probability of those three provisions getting addressed probably does seem on the lower side. But obviously, hope springs eternal.
So, Andrew, the House Ways and Means Committee had set up a portal where interested parties could submit comments on tax reform issues, and the deadline to submit comments is October 15th. What actions should company consider taking at this point?
Well, I think the short answer is companies need to stay engaged, even beyond this deadline for written submissions. It's an important way for the Ways and Means GOP tax teams to collect input from the business community and other stakeholders, but it's not the only way. They've had 90 plus events in 17 states over the course of the last 5+ months. They've had various stakeholders come in to talk to them about various tax issues. And so maybe this marks the culmination of that information gathering stage. But at the end of the day, this is really still a longer journey in terms of the 2025 tax debate and preparing for that, educating members, trying to build consensus within the House Republican Conference. And as part of that dialogue, I think the business community needs to stay engaged, providing the insights and the information that they need to make decisions about tax policies that they believe will promote job creation and economic growth.
Right. Andrew, thanks so much for that.
That was great being here.
So Sindhu, at the top of the show, you had mentioned that we also wanted to talk about some renewable energy guidance. And to do so, we want to bring in Randa Barsoum, a partner in our clean energy and incentives practice. Randa, welcome.
Hi, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Sure, pleasure. So Treasury recently laid out some plans for further implementation of Inflation Reduction Act clean energy provisions. And the Biden administration has indicated that they want to issue some final regulations before the end of the year. Could you talk a little bit about what that might include?
Yes, absolutely. So as you mentioned, Treasury did announce that there are 6 areas where they intend to provide final regulations by the end of the year. The first section has to do with the technology neutral production and investment tax credits under 48 Cap E and 45 Cap Y. Those are the provisions that go into effect on January 1st, 2025 for any projects that are being placed in service, after 2024. Those rules are going to provide some more guidance around what is considered a zero GHG emissions technology that would qualify for the credit, provide some more clarity around that. So we're anticipating some more in that area. The second has to do with Section 48, which is the investment tax credit. That credit's actually phasing out by the end of the year, but it is going to still apply to any projects that are where the construction begins before January 1, 2025. And so projects that are in flight or about to start will still be impacted by that, as well as certain technologies will still be able to use Section 48 after 2024, period. The third area has to do with Section 45X. That is the Advanced Manufacturing Production Tax Credit. And this is really the key credit that is helping with increasing the supply chain and focusing on domestically manufacturing some of the components that go into the energy industry and energy environment. One of the things that was noted is 45X is the fastest growing credit that's part of the transferability market. So huge area there. The other area is 45V, which is for the clean production hydrogen credit. So that's one that's been very hot and a lot of people have been looking for guidance on. Treasury did mention they got over 30,000 comments on that one provision. And so, obviously with all of that information, they've been going through that and really carefully considering how to refine the proposed regulations to balance out, not only the commercial and practical needs of the industry to help grow that industry and get projects, moving to completion, but also balancing the considerations around, making sure that the rules also account for some of the concerns around, not creating more carbon while producing the hydrogen. The fifth area really has to do with the low income community bonus kicker. That's one that has been focused on solar and wind projects under the existing 48 and 45Y investment tax credit and production tax credit. They are looking to expand that under the technology neutral credits to also include other technologies besides solar and wind that companies could apply for that bonus credit. And if you recall, that credit can be either a 10% or a 20% addition to your credit rate. So, a really significant increase if you're eligible for it. Finally, there's also some final regs that we're anticipating that has to do with partnerships that are electing out of partnership status under Section 761. This particular provision is to help companies that are eligible for direct pay, so the tax exempts and the nonprofits, be able to partner better with private companies and developers to get their projects up and running. So we do expect some additional guidance in that space as well.
Sure, makes sense. Randa, thank you so much for that great information. Really appreciate your time. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And Andrew, thank you for joining as well. Appreciate it. And for our viewers, in the description of this episode, you'll find links to a recent episode on the CAMT regulations, Election Watch, and Week in Review with Pam Olson. There's also a link to register for tomorrow's tax readiness webcast on the CAMT regulations.
As always, we appreciate you spending this time with us and hope you have a great week. Take care.